Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another Instant Deck Tech. So as you know, it's Monday, which means Modern Monday, and we have a pretty sweet Modern list today. So you probably know that Affinity is a real deck, one of the best decks in Modern. We even covered it for a tier deck tech a while ago. I think it was our first Tier Thursday Instant Deck Tech, but people debate about Affinity. Is it really Affinity? It doesn't even actually play any Affinity cards, which makes it kind of weird to call it Affinity. Well, someone's looking to change that. We have a real Affinity deck, or a deck I'm calling Real Affinity, that's actually been getting some wins on Magic Online in the hands of SBIRU, so congrats to SBIRU on their finishes with the deck. A quick reminder before we break it all down, if you enjoy this deck and you want to see it made into videos, take a minute, click the like button, the subscribe button, leave a comment, anything you can do to support your deck, because whichever deck is most popular gets a shot at being made into videos next week. So, Real Affinity is called Real Affinity because it's playing actual Affinity cards. So, back when Affinity was in Standard, Mirror Enforcer and Frogmite were two of the most insaniest cards in the deck, because they're essentially creatures that you get for free. They might look overcosted. Mirror Enforcer, 7 mana, 4/4, Frogmite, 4 mana, 2/2. The thing is, the mana cost doesn't really matter because they have affinity for artifacts, so it costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control, which means normally the deck is playing these cards for free. And this deck is, what makes it unique is it's a super all-in version of Affinity. It drops a lot of the more expensive stuff and instead goes all in on the cheapest artifacts possible to flood the board with artifacts, play Mirror Enforcers, Frogmites on turn 1, on turn 2, and kill the opponent really quickly before they have any chance of recovering. So it's way more aggressive than the typical Tier 1 Affinity list. So how is the deck powering out these Mirror Enforcers and Frogmites? Well, a few different ways. First off, you get some 0 mana creatures. Memnite, Ornithopter, they're not super powerful, but when we get to the finishers of the deck, you'll kind of understand what makes them good, because the way the deck wins, well, there's two ways. One is by having a lot of artifacts and going tall on a single artifact thanks to all its other artifacts, or it can go wide with just a bunch of cheap artifacts and pumping them up. We also have a bunch of non-creature spells that are artifacts that are essentially free. Mox Opal makes the deck super explosive. It's very easy to have Metalcraft turned on turn 1, so it's essentially a literal Mox-in that taps for any color in this specific deck. So it helps you play 2-drops on turn 1, play more 1-drops, power out your Mirror Enforcers, your Frogmites. Welding Jar, mostly in the deck to be a 0 mana artifact, but it also regenerates an artifact, so it can keep your Frogmite or whatever alive through a lightning bolt. One of Chalice of the Void, a little weird because Chalice of the Void is actually pretty good against Affinity, but it's another 0 mana artifact potentially, and if you play it later in the game, you can lock out Path to Exiles and Lightning Bolts and a bunch of removal, and Springleaf Drum technically costs a mana, but since you have Ornithopters and Memnites and all these 0 mana creatures, you can tap it immediately for a mana by tapping one of those creatures, which essentially makes it another free artifact to power out the Mirror Enforcers and Frogmites. The deck also gets Darksteel Citadel, which is an artifact land, so it just ups the artifact count for Infinity by 1. The deck is almost exclusively colorless. Actually, the main deck is 100% colorless. You don't need colored mana at all. There's a little red in the sideboard, so you can get away with playing Darksteel Citadel with essentially no opportunity cost, because it taps for colorless, all your stuff is colorless. The deck also has Bomet Curry and Vault Scourge, which are 1-drops that come down on turn 1, help power out your other Affinity cards, helps the deck go wide if it's going on that plan, and also just provides artifacts for the other finishers. Bomet Courier, kind of a new addition from Kaladesh, but it has haste, gets in for 1, and since this deck can dump its hand so quickly, if you can stack it and draw maybe 2 cards or 3 cards, that's a huge deal for this Affinity deck to have a source of card advantage that comes on an artifact. Vault Scourge, you always pay the Phyrexian cost. It's a 1 mana 1/1 with lifelink. And then as far as finishing the game, I mentioned there's 2 plans. So plan A is to go wide. The deck uses Signal Pest to do this. When it attacks, all your attackers get +1/+0. It also has Contested War Zone as a land, so it's a land that switches controllers whenever a creature creature deals damage. So if your opponent hits you with a Tarmogoyf, they steal your contested war zone. However, you can pay 1 and tap it, and all your attacking creatures get +1/+0. It's essentially a battle cry land. So you have multiple ways to just pump your team. So all your Ornithopters and Memnites and Bombat Couriers that look pretty lacking can all of a sudden on turn 2 even be attacking for 3 damage each, which allows the deck to just close out the game super fast. The other plan for finishing the game is to go tall on one artifact. So Arcbound Ravager lets you sack an artifact to put a counter on Ravager, and then it has modular, so when it dies, and it can sack itself, so you can do it at any time, you get to move all the counters on something else. So if you have a bunch of artifacts on the battlefield, you can just sack them all out, move all the counters onto an unblocked creature, and kill your opponent in one shot. Cranial Plating, kind of the same thing. So it gives a creature +1/+0 for each artifact you control. The deck has an insane amount of artifacts. There's only 12 lands, and even 4 of them are artifacts, so it has 52 artifacts. So essentially, every single card in your deck is pumping up this Cranial Plating. So it's really easy to put it on a Memnite or an Ornithopter, or especially a flying creature like Vault Scourge, and hit your opponent for just huge chunks of damage starting on turn 2. Attack for 10 damage with lifelink with a Vault Scourge, for example. The mana base, apart from the lands we talked about, Contested Warzone, Darksteel Citadel, you get 4 Blink Moss, which another flying artifact threat, and then a single mountain. In the sideboard, we get another mountain because the deck does have a few more expensive cards with only 12 lands, which is a bit deceiving because Springleaf Drum and Mox Opal make mana, but with only 12 lands, the deck needs to be able to go up another land if it brings in its Etch Champion to fight against removal heavy decks, or Gorper Ether Grid, which is the deck's answer to Stony Silence. Even if your opponent has a Stony Silence down, you can still tap your artifacts 2 at a time to ping your opponent or their creatures to death. And then Gutshot and Ancient Grudge give the deck a bit of removal. Chalice of the Void, Grafdigger's Cage, and Scale of Crisgoria give the deck some hate cards, helpful cards that also go along with the deck's main theme. Anyway, that's real Affinity for Modern, and that's been our Instant Deck Tech for today. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon.